Unspoiled Network podcast.
This is Spoil Me, covering Mage, Errant, Book 7, The Last Echo of the Lord of Bells. Chapters 61, 62, and 63. By Greed Entrapped, Sudden Onset, and Hasty Negotiations. In these chapters, Indra's Stormbreaker is killed. I'm really struggling to comprehend that because I just didn't expect her to be on the list. I think I just straight up was like, no, of course she can't die because we have things to do still. Welcome to Spoil Me. Welcome to the show, everyone. I am Natasha. Thank you very much to Dan for commissioning this episode. Dan is here in the chat. What's up? What's up? What's up? What's up? You guys, these chapters are really, there's so much. I'm going to really have to be careful about, just staying on task here because I feel like there is a lot that I have to get through. And, starting off with the intro talking about Indra's Stormbreaker, there are arguably some other bigger deals happening, but I can't help but focus on something that really genuinely caught me off guard because I just don't know if I'm the only one. I'm curious if any of you felt the same way, but I just really didn't think that she was going anywhere. If anything, if there was going to be a high profile death of a great power that we had grown to know and care about more, I thought it might be Alenia. So yeah, that just really startled me. And I am especially sad because Indra's pacted with the kid that Hugh was mentoring. I can't remember his name. And that kid was so excited. And now his, mentor is already gone. And the whole thing that he had mapped out for himself of how this was going to go. I don't know if she had any sort of eventualities in place for how that would be handled if she died, because I don't know how much she herself considered the possibility that her life was actually in danger in a serious way. It's one thing to know we may not come out of this, and it's another thing to really believe there's a genuine chance versus anything could happen. So anyway, all right, let's start off at the beginning here. Chapter 61 by Greed Entrapped. And this starts off with Indra's POV. This is the most uneven fight. Heliothrax is just completely out of control. And there is a whole vibe that is coming off of both Indris and Alenia. Basically, this bitch can't survive this battle. We cannot allow her to keep living. If she is able to get away from us here, and she has done this horrific shit by now with these, this vivisection, and she, by getting out of this battle, she will have gotten away with it. That means that she has already crossed the line. The seal is broken. And now, who knows what the fuck kind of monstrous shit she will do. This is something that everybody would have expected was just over the line and not to be considered. And she has not done it once. She has done it, a couple dozen times, it seems like. So yeah, this this creature has completely crossed over from being somebody who is powerful but rational to someone so utterly consumed with gaining more power that absolutely any ethics are completely thrown by the wayside. And there's just, there is a point in another book that I'm covering Red Rising. For those who are interested, I'm also covering for Spoil Me. But there's like a hierarchy of different types of people, and they're designated by color. And the highest colors are golds, and then there are people who are pinks, reds, greens, whites, and they are lower caste and all have like particular jobs that they tend to do. And at one point, two golds are speaking, and one of them is talking about his late brother and says, "My brother was very empathetic, but empathy is a lower color thing." And honestly, that's the whole vibe, isn't it? So the reason that Heliothrax is able to do the completely unhinged shit that she's doing here is because there are no boundaries for her at all. She doesn't have empathy for other creatures, so she can manage to do things that are actually literally unthinkable for many of us. So anyway, they are all pulling out the stops in terms of what kind of magic they can do. Sabae and Alustin are working with Indris, and they are doing this like really neat thing where they begin to create a cyclone around Heliothrax and pull moisture out of her body. And this is so wild. Let's see. Dehydration spells were usually far from worth it in combat. They were far too mana intensive even against a human, were easily countered by enemy water mages, healers, or any one of a dozen other affinities, and were slow even when they did work. Between all their current battlefield advantages, the fact that Heliothrax's new water affinity was by far one of her weakest, and the ridiculous ether density around them, it was worth a try, though. And this is like feeling like it's going to work. And all I could think about with this was Crocodile from One Piece. Those of you who are not familiar, he is a character who has basically what equates to like a sand affinity. But the way that the magic works in that universe is much less scientifically based. And so he could essentially suck all of the moisture out of you. And he grabs people by the throat and they become mummified within seconds. So that's what I kept thinking about here. Just before she launched the spear, something landed on the labyrinth corridor in front of Indris. You guys, this figure... Indris Stormbreaker, too long has your tyranny oppressed the human masses. Too long have you fostered chaos for your own petty greed. I, Elithe Apex, am here to slay you, and... Indris stepped on him. This is so embarrassing, Elithe. I don't know who taught you battle manners, but you don't come in and waste your time speechifying for minutes before you start actually fighting somebody. That's like, this is just, it's guaranteed to get you killed, kids. I just don't know how many times people have to see this sort of thing happen. This is, in a Suki chapter that I was just covering with Miles, a fairy shows up to kill her, and he says, "I'm going to enjoy killing you," which is what tips her off that he's there, or else she would not even have noticed. And she is able to kill him pretty much by reflexive response to being startled by somebody speaking right beside her. So if he had just fucking shut up and gotten the job done, maybe. Now this guy, that is not... Even if he hadn't spoken like this, likely it would not have mattered. This guy was just not up for it. But that is just so embarrassing. So he is nothing. And this is when Heliothrax just does the, I'm going to blast out all the spells I've got in every direction. Which ordinarily it would be sort of like, wow, you are really, wow, not focused, not smart. You're just doing like bashing via spell work, you know. And you could look down on that, except that right now there's so much mana and Heliothrax has so much magic at her disposal. It's like, I can't even laugh at it right now because it's working. It's fucking absolutely wrecking everything that they try to do. So in comes Alustin. And Indris is like, motherfucker, because he was told to stay away. This is the dude, by the way, who is responsible for taking over the territory that Heliothrax had technically owned, and he had managed to get a hold of via illusion magic. So, like, this dude was already not up for it against Heliothrax before she did all of her upgrades. There is absolutely no fucking way at this point. Indris should have let the beautiful moron suffer the consequences of his impetuousness. Instead, Indris found herself driving faster than she ever had before, racing to intercept Heliothrax with all the mana she could squeeze out of her wind reservoir. It was a tactically stupid move, but she'd always had a weakness for a graceful pair of wings. Basically, correct me if I'm wrong, Indris is like, he's too hot to die. Indris, what are you doing, baby? and you know, like, oh my god. It's the equivalent of, oh, he's got a really nice ass. I can't just, like, let this happen. As the two dragons inexorably closed on one another, the third to last thing Indris felt was a curious buzzing sensation in the ether coming from one of the living dragon heads grafted to Heliothrax. The next to last thing Indris felt as the two elder worms came together was regret at her own impetuous foolishness. The last thing Indris Stormbreaker felt was pain. And, yeah, that's that. This is terrible. So Alinea, we jump over to her POV, who is just like, wow, okay, if that's, like, that's basically a period at the end of the sentence. We have to get the fuck out of here. I love that she just runs, because that's really the smart thing to do at the moment. And at the very least, it's the one, like, advantage that she's got. Heliothrax is so powerful right now, but she is also much bigger and less agile, so she doesn't have the kind of speed that she might once she had begun to use her other power. Like, she could become potentially a Thunderbringer, according to Indris, but hasn't reached that point yet with her ability to use her own new magic. So Alinea has this kind of advantage. And what's funny here is that she's like, all right, well, I've got to get out of here. And she's looking at all of these different people who are still fighting and thinking, like, God, your little battles are nothing. They're so unimportant. You should just fucking get out. And then she has a, like, mental image of Sabae raising an eyebrow and looking at her like, really? And she tries to put it out of her head, but it keeps coming back. Pushing aside imagination to focus on survival. That's what the back of Alinea's mind was trying to tell her, obnoxiously dressing it up as the voice of her granddaughter. Setting aside imagination for victory, to protect the status quo. Alinea and her ancestors had done it for generations. And she's just sort of overwhelmed suddenly with how we keep doing the same shit. And she decides, you know what? Let me think about this. And she pulls out her flask and takes a sip. And I really thought this was interesting. She didn't like the taste. She likes it because it keeps her grounded. Helped keep her from losing all touch with the common run of humanity. Helped remind her shit still stank. Alinea smirked humorlessly at the thought, then took one more swig as she passed through a column of smoke from a burning city block. She very carefully isolated the air inside her personal windshield from the smoke. Sealing off her personal bubble drowned out the monstrous roars of Heliothrax's magic, and it let her hear a noise she'd long since learned to tune out. So it turns out that she has a flask with like a second function to it. It does hold literally hundreds or thousands of gallons of alcohol, which is amazing. But also there's another is it interdimensional? Extra-dimensional, I think is the word that he uses, space within it. And apparently there had been somebody who was like way back in her family, Marie Candace, that had caught a storm elemental, a typhoon elemental. Elenia's fool family had kept trying to harness it, kept trying to turn it into a weapon or another power source, or tried to find a way to hijack its consciousness and succeed where its centuries-dead creator had failed. But she's like thinking how I keep doing the same, like our whole family is doing the same shit over and over. And she herself inherits it and is like also attempting to do the same thing. As the Krakenbane raced through the ruins, dodged collapsing labyrinth corridors and ceaseless magical assaults from the Sunworm, the voice of her granddaughter popped up in her head again, with her ridiculously youthful idealism, her impossible demands that the course of history shift to please her. As the greatest living storm mage in the world raced toward the half-poisoned, half-evaporated Greywise River that bordered the city in an effort to fight in more favorable terrain, her imagination took the form of Sabae once more and pointed out something vital. Elenia already had given up avenues to power, was bleeding away the Storm Seat's artificial mana reservoir to empower the first of her new warlock students. She laughed to herself, took one last sip of rotgut, and closed the flask. Then she reopened it and unscrewed the cap in a different direction. She whirled to face the Sunworm, and Heliothrax had the dubious honor of being the first to greet the gargantuan Typhoon Elemental as it was released from imprisonment. And then when we go to other POVs throughout this section, we keep joining them either as or shortly before they feel the change, because it's a like insane sound. The air pressure, like temperature, everything is so affected so immediately that there's almost nobody who isn't aware something major has just shifted in the terrain. So speaking of people who are aware, we then go to Kandaron Crux. And she feels this open and is just like, wait a second. When the Chitin Wand's ether rippled past Skyhold, Kandaron had needed to forcibly restrain herself from trying to waken her demean, even knowing it wasn't possible, that she would break herself trying. And now this was entirely too much to bear. Kandaron began to scream inside her own mind. As the unnatural winds began to spiral out across the emergent labyrinth, Kandaron's rage shook the very fabric of her own demean. Lightning began crawling in vast webs across the labyrinth corridors, seeking out and clinging to the molten and recooled bronze of the city. Entire walls of rain burst into steam against the streams and rivers of magma. Kandaron strained at the bonds of her own lich dream so powerfully it might have sent a dream mage into seizures. At the top of the rising storm cloud, the eye of Heliothrax began stirring in its cloud top into boiling steam. Kandaron brought her rage to bear, swung her mental representation of her own leg against her mental representation of her Yellowstone detector, an enchantment designed to let her track down the poisonous forbidden mineral. As yet another superweapon picked over the bones of Havath City, Kandaron shattered the Yellowstone detector, rending it completely from her demean. And even in her rage, Canderon froze in shock. As the speeding Typhoon Elemental began sweeping suspended buildings off their labyrinth perches, as the gale winds began to trigger one labyrinth collapse after another, Canderon slowly felt at the hole where the Yellowstone detector should have been. Felt at the space in her mind where the enchantment hadn't yet been stitched into her demesne, hadn't yet become one of her organs, and now never would. With uncanny swiftness, before the Typhoon Elemental could even envelop a third of the dead city, Canderon felt a message arrive from Kiata. And Kiata is like, what the fuck are you doing? And they have an argument, essentially, about how Canderon is doing this because she still misses her family, which she has lost so long ago, that she is getting involved and too attached to beings who are extremely ephemeral, that she needs to keep the big picture much more in mind, because the things that she is destroying would have brought her the kind of power that people can't even fathom. And Canderon's response is essentially, all of the shit around me that I'm destroying, those are the actual toys. The people who matter to me, that's big picture shit. I throw away my toys to rescue my new family. No, not that either. I throw them away to rescue myself, out of selfishness, out of refusal to be left alone once more. What is the point of power if it costs you the very things you wish to protect? Each time she shattered a new demesne component, she severed the connection of a half-integrated new tool. But each time the tremors grew smaller and the demesne more stable. She set her eyes on the last demesne edition, on the greatest and most powerful of her designs, the World Gate Ripper. And she takes a second to be like, is it worth it? And is like, yeah, no question. And then begins to destroy that as well. So it's interesting to me that this Typhoon Elemental is of such a level of power that Canderon is motivated to simply drop everything that she's doing. And not in a way that I can come back to this later. She's giving up on it. I feel like when the Typhoon Elemental was released, I wasn't grasping just what a big deal this is. I know a typhoon is it's a storm the likes of which I have literally never seen. I imagine the closest thing is a hurricane. I don't know if a typhoon is like higher category winds or exactly how that sort of thing is, where the naming convention comes from. But I have never experienced an actual hurricane either. I've had nor'easters hit, and I've had bad thunderstorms since living in Texas. We've had some storms I have, never seen the likes of, but not this kind of thing. So I think I was like, well, everybody hunkered down and just get out of the way and we'll be all right. But I keep forgetting how completely precarious everything is because of the way the labyrinth, just shoved upward. The delicacy of the balance of it all means that it's like everybody's in one of those little, things that you can see ants tunneling, and a person has just picked it up and shaken it like mad. It's worse because you do that and the ants just have to redo these little tunnels. They don't die, but this is the equivalent of doing that after you've added a bunch of rocks to it, and we jump over to 62 to Sabae, who is feeling this as it's happening. And I love this. She is talking to Tienkis and pulling him out away from the swarm, and is feeling weird about the fact that I'm helping this demon instead of getting into a huge battle with it, which is what I feel like I should be doing. I'm not doing my job, even though she is. Sabae was distracted from the feeling when she noticed Alustin simply stop talking to Valia, his face paling. His fellow Helicotan and a few others nearby immediately started interrogating Alustin, but the paper mage just shook his head as he stared off into space, his attention fully fixed on his scrying for several minutes. She didn't try to climb down from Scrathanak's horn. Her hearing had grown significantly sharper since her visit to Limnus. So, this is when... Sorry, Dan is in the chat, flask of endless whiskey, and then I swear Bierce heard your complaints about how generic the demon was in the first book. That is exactly what I said last episode, Dan. I was just like, so he did decide he was going to do a little bit of a, like, surprise bit, you know? I kind of like it. I don't know if it was something that he planned from the start, or if enough people had the same doubt about whether or not he was actually evil that he thought, maybe I should do something a little bit surprising there, you know? I also just like the sort of trope of like, oh, a creature that you met isn't the representative of one of those types of creatures. Because it's a lot more interesting world building when a race of being are not identical in their temperament and motivation. It's just a lot more interesting. So Sabae takes immediate control of the situation. She's the only one, everybody knows that there's like a weather change, but she's the only one who knows the exact thing that has happened. So she says, Scrathanax, find us a labyrinth entrance high off the ground. Anyone with scrying ability, make sure the labyrinth influence is still strong wherever Scrathanax takes us. The storm's going to take out any part of the labyrinth that's even close to collapsing. She spoke as though she expected to be obeyed, and to her shock, she was. I really enjoy whenever this sort of thing happens in a book because, like, it's such a true thing. If you handle things like people are going to listen to you, and it is you just simply take that for granted, it is really, really surprising how much people respond to it. And I think that we have, unfortunately, especially like American individualism, we have grown to really insist that if you are a follower and somebody who takes instruction, that means that you can't possibly be an original thinker and you are not as interesting, intelligent, or valuable a person. That if you aren't ordering others around and calling the shots, that you're somehow weaker or like a beta. And the fact is, there are very few real leaders out there. There are mostly people who really prefer to be told what to do and follow instructions. And there is nothing wrong with being the type of person that takes instruction and does what they are told in the right circumstances. That does not mean you stop thinking for yourself. It means you recognize when your expertise or your judgment isn't going to be the last word, and you bow to those that you know have more experience in whatever particular field or subject. And I feel like so many people just don't have the humility to know when to do that or respect others who do that. And like, I tend to be a leader in a lot of like the groups, and anytime that I was like in a workplace, I would be put into a supervisory position really, really quickly because I have the kind of personality where I think very practically, efficiently about things, and I'm able to identify people's like abilities and put them in the position that they need to be in. But there are a lot of times where I will be like, oh, I don't know anything about this. And I will just find somebody who does know. You aren't always going to be the expert in the room who should be calling the shots. And I think that takes its own kind of critical thinking. So when you have this sort of tone of voice, people can hear the certainty and they respond to the implicit feeling of this person is saying this with total confidence because they know precisely what's happening and what needs to be done in response to what's happening. And you instinctively can hear it in their voice. And I just wish that Americans had not grown to hate this kind of response so much, and that we weren't also greedy to be the ones in charge or the ones who had all of the, like, can't we just share being, you can be your expert in your own particular thing that you know about, but just not in everything. And that's fine. It's still valuable, you know? But anyway, I just really like this moment, especially because Sabae is so clearly a leader and she doubts herself so much. And it's very gratifying to see her immediately know what to do and exactly who to ask to do it. So by the time Scrathanax tracked down an opening, Sabae could barely make out deep within the maze a looming, roiling darkness, devouring the ruins and the labyrinth as it rushed toward her. It all screamed to her affinity senses, and Sabae could only hope Vervin remembered the family lessons about Moray's storm and hid from the Typhoon Elemental. And then Scrathanax dove into the ruined labyrinth, using his gravity magic to counter the gravitational oddities of the corridor, and flew purely with his gravity magic, his wings tucked fully against his side. The dragon didn't stop immediately, to Sabae's relief, but went through several turns and intersections before landing in a round, almost drum-shaped chamber. It was good that he'd kept going, because the storm almost certainly would have penetrated into the first few corridors. Here they should be fine with merely a couple of protective wards over the chamber entrances. So, yeah, it's mentioned, like, this is one of Indris's children, and I'm sure that they know about storms and how to handle this shit. So everybody gathers around her, and she has to explain to them about the elemental, and then halfway through this, the storm hits. The sound rolled through the halls like an explosion, and quite a few archmages winced until Emondson Dries and Shimmering Cardivan used their magic to block the storm's roar. And Sabae is like, it's going to be at least an hour before we're going to be able to venture out at all. And even then, I don't feel like I recommend it, but at the moment, it's certainly suicide. And Valia is like, staying here is also really bad. Like, this is still, we're in a time crunch at the moment, and we need to keep managing what we're doing. Which we find out later what's going on with that. And I was just like, that is extremely rude, and why would you do this? So, Alustin then shares the news. Indris Stormbreaker and Andasthun have both died. Poor Scrathanax, I felt so bad. He curls into a trembling ball. You guys, the idea of a dragon just suddenly shaking and trembling with grief is the saddest thing. It just got me so bad. I felt so sad over this. Sarkis Vi promptly fled after Indris fell. Elinia Kandas released this storm elemental while trying to escape. I lost track of both of them, and I'm still trying to find them. And I figured out where the last resonator is. Heliathrax has been storing various magical weapons she's captured in the mouths of the living dragon heads she's fused to herself. And one of them is holding the last resonator. And everybody is just like, oh my god. And they then have to figure out what they're going to do. The interesting suggestion from Talia is to find Eudaxis, who is the shadow mage who can teleport through shadows. And it says magically reaching inside the closed mouth of another being wasn't generally something greater shadow mages were known to be capable of. And even weaker solar mages had some moderate abilities to counteract great shadow mages, but still definitely worth a try. Look, I should have known that it was all going to come down to dealing with Heliathrax, but I just didn't want it to. I just what I want, and this is funny because it's not really what I want. So hear me out. What I want is for Heliothrix to wind up being like hoisted on her own petard sort of thing, which is frequently the trope, right? Somebody breaks off more than they can chew or bites off, I guess is really the way that saying goes. But they attempt to do something regarding absorbing power that is actually kind of outside of their ability to absorb, control, whatever. And although it works temporarily and seems to make them into a completely unstoppable machine, there quickly reaches a point where they reach like a critical capacity, and all of a sudden their body begins to shut down in response. And I have been hoping Heliothrix, using all of this magic the way that she has been repeatedly in dramatic fashion, releasing like all of these spells at the same time in sudden response when she's feeling overpowered, that this was going to prove to be like a means of wearing down at her body's capacity to handle it all. That maybe her ether body would prove to be unequal to it, you know? It's, when I say that I want this and I don't want this, what I mean is finding a way to actually kill her is so overwhelming a task in my mind that I like this both for the neatness of it, with nobody else having to necessarily be involved in it, except with triggering her in the fight till she gets to this point. And also, there's the justice. You know, she did this hideous thing to all of these dragons and is subjecting them to this unending pain that is horrifying. And now all of that comes back to bite her. You just love that, you know? It's a very neat and tidy thing. It's satisfying, and it's round edge. Like it's a tidy end. And yeah, all of those reasons are also why I don't want that to be the way it goes, because it is such a trope, you know, and it is like predictable. So I guess I was just sort of like, yeah, that's how it's gonna go probably in the end. And now I'm like, I don't think so after all. Oh no. So let's see. Okay, here's Sabae. You guys, they are talking about going out into the typhoon, and she says you need to filter your air. The elemental is going to be picking up literal tons of poisonous alchemical substances leaking out of the intertwined demesnes. We're literally going to be dealing with a poisonous hurricane. It won't kill you, at least not in the short term, but it will make you extremely sick, and it will almost certainly cause you lifelong illness with enough exposure. One of the flyers raised a hand. Wouldn't it technically be a venomous hurricane since it's alive and spitting the poison at us? I'm going to argue no. The hurricane is alive, but the poison is not coming from the hurricane. Well, they're calling it a hurricane. So earlier I said I don't know the difference between a typhoon and a hurricane. It seems like they're the same thing. But I'm going to say that the poison coming from somewhere else and simply being carried does not count. It's poison. It's different. So then Alustin comes over to Sabae, and you guys know that I was living for this. This whole scene is just everything. So he shows up and she just says, so it's my turn now? And he's like, what? What do you mean? Well, you've been talking to us one by one. So obviously you were going to get to me eventually. I guess you want like forgiveness? But that's not happening. You know that, right? I am not going to forgive you. I have done, like, over the course of our relationship, I have given you so many chances to not fuck us over. And you just kept fucking us over anyway. And he says, well, I owe you answers. And she says, what questions are there to ask? Your motives are childish and uninteresting. Your means are interesting, but probably useless to me. And your future plans are moot, because it's doubtful you'll survive the day. I cannot. You guys, this is so good. His own remorse hadn't stopped him from betraying his students again and again. Sabae would be a fool to accept it, or to expect it would prevent him from betraying them again if he felt it necessary. And this is the thing. Like, you know, I've talked a lot about forgiveness on this show, and the variety of things that people say, the trite and sometimes true, sometimes just overly simplified things that people talk about regarding what it means to forgive, and how, well, you're doing it for you, not for them. But ultimately, for me, if somebody has repeatedly claimed to be like remorseful and they are apologizing, but they do not change any of their behavior, they aren't actually sorry. And that's that on that. You can say, I'm so sorry, every single time. The more times you say I'm sorry for doing the same shit, the more obvious it is you aren't actually. And she's fucking correct. And he knows that she is. He fucking does. Because Alustin, it's weird. He has like absolutely no self-awareness in certain ways. But I think being spoken to like this, it's exactly what he has been like trying to keep from happening by attempting. This is what manipulative people do. They demonstrate just enough self-awareness to kind of cut you off at the knees and make it feel like you criticizing them is pointless because they already know about themselves. And you're just going to be reinforcing things that they are already aware of, or, you know, just like there's a sense to it of, you don't need to say it because I know. And because I know already, it means that I've already begun to think about my own flaws and work on them. But thinking about them and knowing about them are not the same as working on them. And if you're doing the same thing over and over, you're not working on them. You know? And it's just like, actually, I do have one question. Has your destruction of the city affected the ether? Have you accelerated our world's risk of another ether criticality for your vengeance? No. Our world has hundreds, if not thousands, of labyrinths. One dead labyrinth, even a large one, won't affect the state of our universe. Sabae nodded, then turned to go, only to have Alustin keep talking. I understand that you hate me, and I won't say I don't deserve it, but you probably won't get this opportunity again, Sabae. Like you said, I probably won't make it through the day, and Sabae shook her head. You're desperate to have these conversations with us, aren't you? You need to explain yourself. Need to at least be able to tell yourself that you tried. You won't get that from me, though. Now, why don't you contact Hugh through your little paper communicators? He might have more pity for you. She used a drop of wind magic to spray the deck of cards at him, and was already walking away to speak with Godric and Talia before the cards started hitting the ground. She didn't even bother to look back to see the look on his face. Ultimate queen behavior. That is it. Period. End of sentence. Stan Sabae forever. She deserves to be a ruler. That is, look, when you are in charge, you can't afford to waffle on who deserves your trust, at what courses of action to pursue. She is correct. She gave him some chances. He squandered them. And now he's over here trying to fucking whine about all the reasons why. She knows why. There's nothing you can tell her she isn't already aware of. You're just trying to rationalize everything. And you're hoping if you talk around her in a circle for long enough, you'll trick her into thinking that maybe you deserve forgiveness. It's bullshit. It's super gross. And it's cowardly. You better just sit there with your bad decisions, Alustin. Just fucking sit there with it. Which is honestly one of the more effective forms of punishment. Like, not giving somebody the chance to hash it out and they just have to fucking, sit in the stew that they have created. Sucks to suck. So then we go to 63, hasty negotiations. So, this is really interesting. So, we're with Karna Scythe. There was one warning needed for anyone who would dare challenge one of the Sican Elders. They were not mere brutes, and their enormous size and strength were only two of a vast number of threats they posed. Karna Scythe had gone into the battle heeding that warning, but hadn't truly understood its importance. And what's happening here is that Karna Scythe is going back and forth with this Sican Elder and not beating it, and beginning to realize, oh my god, if I can't even beat this thing, what fucking chance did I have against a great power like I was sort of planning to do? Karna and the other assembled great powers. Why the Sican Elder? Let's see. The hundreds of Sican mages carried around by the gargantuan wooden figure were a well-trained, disciplined force who kept fighting even when many of them were crushed by the flailing, chain-riddled Hydra serving the Coven. And this thing, first of all, it's growing fucking forests everywhere that it steps, which is banana pants. Each chunk of wood broken off in battle sprouted vast swaths of moss. With every step it took, its body shed thousands, if not millions, of seeds across the ground. Living wards the size of trees and combat glyphs the size of houses sprouted in the wake of the Elder. Vast root networks spread from them, erupting from the ground thousands of feet away to impale foes. Unnaturally large flowers spat great clouds of toxic pollen into the air. What? Just go. Karna, just leave. Just get out of there. Oh my god. She keeps trying to stop it from growing. And she's only got a couple allies left. It was only when Castor's Spellstorm fell, Karna realized how outmatched they were. Castor was fine one moment, then coughing the next. Sprouts and leaves erupted out of Castor's mouth. When the green tendrils started sprouting from his tear ducts, when vines curled out of his nose and flower buds began blooming through his skin, his struggle quickly ceased. By the time Castor fell out of the air and hit the ground, you could hardly tell he'd been human. Ouch. That's so hideous. And I really want to give Beer some credit here. He doesn't just say when the tendrils start sprouting from his eye sockets. It specifically says tear ducts, which is so much worse. If you just said if they burst out his eye sockets, it's the destruction of the eyes, and that's horrible. But it's also almost cartoonish. The tear ducts is such a specific thing, and it's implying his eyes are still there, and these things are growing out around his eyes, which the imagery of that is so upsetting. It's so incredibly disturbing. I really, really hated this. So Karna goes up to Iblin and is like, so Castor's a human flower pot now. And Iblin's like, yeah, saw that. However, we don't have to worry. Your immune system is killing them faster than you can inhale them, and my fiber and healing magics are protecting me. If we keep going like this, we're going to lose. What are you proposing? An alliance with the Coven? Iblin shrugged. I hold no grudge against them or their forces. I'm only here to kill Havathi. Fighting Seekins is just a nice bonus. Not much more of a fan of them than I am of the Havathi. One of us needs to get into the Coven outpost and try to negotiate with them. I'll No need. I'm already communicating with one of their commanders. Seized enough stray threads from clothing in their command post to create impromptu vocal cords and listening threads. That's fucking bananas. I just really want to, like, put it in your head, y'all. The idea that you're in a room, there's just some, like, jackets hanging on the wall, and they just begin to, like, unravel themselves and turn into weird harp-looking things and now talk to you. That would be the most creepy shit. Like, oh my God. So, they accept. They've extended an invitation for the remains of our forces to enter their base. Ask the Coven if they can loan any of Indra's children to help ferry our troops. Say please. I'm not your subject, I'm your ally. You ask, not order. Karna glowered. Please. It rankled her pride, but unchecked pride was the downfall of monarchs and great powers. She would do far more humiliating things for victory, and in fairness, the Thread Queen had more than earned Karna's respect. She'd make sure to have her historians write something insulting about Iblin in a few years, though. Oh, Karna. So, this is when the Hydra says, keep it from regaining its feet. And both of them are shocked because even though they were told the Hydra could speak, it's like literally never happened before. So they both just were like, yeah, sure it speaks, and did not take it seriously at all. She supposes a stone lich counted as an intelligent talking rock, but then shook her head and redoubled the quake under the Sican Elder's feet. The only reason the evacuation into the Coven encampment was even possible was the bulk of Karna and her allies' forces were positioned on the far side from the Great Power brawl. Even still, the casualty reports Iblin periodically relayed to Karna were nightmarish. Her army was moving under assault from the surviving Havath army in the area, which was bad enough, but lethal seed clouds were spreading, and the Mage army quickly came to refer to them as blood gardens. Hundreds of her mages died before healers were distributed widely enough among them. When the healers were there, at least they could stop the blood gardens before they tore their victims apart. Likewise, plant mages could slow the infection long enough for a healer to get there, and wind mages could help shield the army from some of the seeds. I'm just going to say right now, I don't know, I think I've mentioned before that I'm trying to write a murder mystery, and it's going to have witchcraft in it. You guys just brace yourselves, because there is no fucking way that I am not going to be using creepy flower growing magics that kill you in my stories. It's happening. It makes me like sick to think about, and also it's just so fascinating, and like it has that real straddle between absolutely gruesome and beautiful, because you've got somebody whose skull is being crushed, but also a rose bush is there growing, and that is, that's a real sweet spot. So anyway, Iblin swung around the battlefield, her immense fiber armor hanging from labyrinth corridors as she darted in and out, all while constantly wrestling with the enemy great power for the control of the plants around them. She's using her fiber affinity to pull on the fiber, because their plants are fibers practically, The Elder had the edge so long as the plants were intact and alive, but every time plants were crushed or ripped apart, the fiber mage gained the advantage. Though Karna noted the Thread Queen kept her actual anemone armor very carefully free of any of the fibers from the Elder's plants. The Hydra was the most straightforward, and he just is bashing the shit out of them. Clancastus, meanwhile, kept spawning more and more fire elementals. They'd stopped sending them directly against the Elder, who could grab and extinguish any one of them in his fist, and they were swarming over the ever-spreading plant life around the Elder, doing their best to keep it away from the Coven base. Each elemental spawned was a little smaller than the last, and the time between each was growing, but they were still proving far more effective against the spreading greenery than against the Sican Elder. It wasn't enough, though. All of their efforts combined only served to weaken and slow the Elder, not to stop it. Even the combined battle and siege magic of the Coven in their encampment only slowed the spread of the hungry green. Karna's scythe had absolutely no doubt the greenery would devour the ruined city entire if given the chance. It was then that her quake affinity senses felt the entire city begin to rumble, and felt something impossibly powerful rolling toward the encampment. By the time the Typhoon Elemental struck, only a third of Karna's army had made it to the shelter of the Coven encampment. And that is the end of the chapter. So, MX Shard just showed up, and it's like, MX just like sent, "Oh, hi, it's Tuesday. Hi, everyone. Sorry I'm late." Like the moment that I'm like, and that's the last sentence in this section. Sorry, MX Shard. But you guys, yeah, this is an incredibly brutal, like, the number of casualties of this battle, I feel like it's going to be in, like, the 60 percentile range. It's looking like it might be worse. You know, it has seemingly grown from, we've sustained a number of casualties to, if you're getting out of this, you're in the minority and count your blessings kind of thing. I'm really curious what the Typhoon will do to the Sican Elder, if it will survive that kind of weather, because if it's adaptable, it may just be able to grow and be strong enough to, like, create a sort of wall of roots and stuff. You know, trees can get knocked over during hurricanes, but plenty don't. So depending on how it handles it. And what's interesting is, like, Carnicide has teamed up with the Coven in order to fight this thing, which, you know, basically they're uniting against a common enemy here. Will they unite against with the Sican Elder against the Elemental? And does it count as a common enemy when the Elemental is from their own side? Somebody, like, of their own, you know what I mean? And where's Alinea in all of this? Is she, like, did she just flee as soon as she let it out and get to someplace secure? Or did the act of letting it out kill her or do something to hurt her because she was so close by? I just have a lot of questions about how all of this works, you know? And I am just really still very curious about what is going to happen with Alustin at the end of all of this. And I'm so gratified by Sabae's response to him. She just had no fucking time for his bullshit. And she wasn't going to humor him and indulge his, like, need to talk. That's all he ever wants to fucking do. I relate. I really do. But sometimes I don't deserve it. And he doesn't right now. And she was completely right. I do not blame the others for talking to him. Just to be clear, I'm not saying she's better than them or handled it in a better way. I am simply saying that she, in particular, knew Alustin wasn't fully to be trusted in a way that the others didn't really seem to be willing to suspect him. And even with those suspicions, he managed to fuck her over. So, yeah, you know, I'm just not mad at her. So that's the end of this section. I really, really am enjoying this. Like, I feel like we were doing battle, so much fighting, and it was getting a little bit tedious. But this section with the Sican Elder and what it does, and people teaming up, and Indris dying, and Alinea having to pull the stops out, and then Kandaron deciding, okay, I got to do something. Now we are shifting into a new energy, and I'm really here for it. I feel like this has gone on long enough, and we needed to do something to move things forward. So, all right. Well, I'm going to wrap this up. Thank you guys again so much for hanging out with me. Thank you, Dan, for commissioning this. And I'll be seeing you guys on Thursday with a new episode. Until then, toodaloo, motherfuckers.
was an Unspoiled Network podcast.